Okay, 2 minutes past. I think there's still a few people joining, but I'm going to get started. We've got only half an hour today, so I want to make sure that we get as much out of it as we can. But thank you very much for joining us. My name is Kate Gibson. I am Managing Director of Consumer Brands at Cirkle. And this is the first in what's going to be a series of masterclasses from our agency, where the idea is that we share, along with our brilliant clients on calls, some examples of best practice work, and keep them kind of short and sweet, just a half an hour, just to try and answer some of the challenges that people are facing in the marketing and comms industry more broadly. And we've got lots of you here today across marketing and comms from a brilliant range of brands, retail, leisure, lifestyle, and FMCG brands. Thank you very much for making the time to join us and for also sharing your challenges as well when you submitted to attend. So the idea is that we'll aim to answer as many of those challenges as we can through the discussion today. But if you've got any questions as well, please pop them in the chat and we will try to answer them at the end for you as well. So we're going to spend half an hour discussing our wonderful client Dulux and their 20th anniversary of the Colour of the Year initiative, and looking at the effectiveness of stories and what it takes to make a story travel across multiple channels. So to help kind of dive a little bit deeper into that story first approach, I've asked Rebecca, my agency buddy, to join me. Rebecca is Circle's Creative Strategy Director. And she's going to share our thoughts as an agency on how we work in this way with our clients. And we're also joined by a very special guest and long-term client, Karen Wilkinson. Karen is Marketing Director of UK and Ireland at Akzonobel, which owns the wonderful heritage brand Dulux. So she's going to discuss from her perspective how this is rolled out from a client's perspective and all the challenges and good things that come with that. So we're gonna get cracking. First of all, just to talk about what we mean by a story first approach, and thinking about how, if we reframe the approach to be story first, it can really help to increase our reach, our relevance, and our agility in the work that we do for our clients. So I'm going to hand over to Rebecca, who's going to talk a little bit more about what we mean by that approach.
So I guess essentially story first is really a way of reframing comms to ensure that it's genuine and there's an authentic integration. It's actually, I would say it's quite simple, really. It's about sort of working with our clients to have a really clear and specific picture of the story they want to tell. And that can be something, as large as a brand reappraisal or perception shifting, what they want the brand to mean to their consumers, or to the audience they're trying to speak to. Ultimately, we sort of get to a place where we understand not just sort of the brand narrative, but what they want people to feel, the impact that they want to have on people's lives, and I guess ultimately what they want to mean in the context of those people's lives as well. And I guess once we have that story, we start looking at channels and mindsets and the right way to tell that story. But we don't break it down into channel strategies or sort of siloed thinking by channel without that true understanding of a North Star of the story we're trying to tell. And I guess the other thing about story first, which I think is really important, and Kate sort of has alluded to already, but the agility that it enables. I think once you're really clear on what you want to mean, it means that we can move really quickly. We can respond really quickly to trends, to crises, to opportunities, and truly integrating that social and PR means that we have all the tools and the avenues that allow us to engage brand audiences more effectively. So we can leverage sort of instantaneous sharing. We can leverage the interactive nature of social, or the breadth and width of awareness from media in this sort of real-time way. And it's all about ultimately creating conversations that are based in a human truth, and not just creating them, but joining them as well, joining them with the point of view that is relevant, that we feel like will travel from person to person or platform to platform. I guess always seeking to sort of gain that breadth of reach, but to do it with relevance for the people that we're talking to.
Thanks, Rebecca. And handing over to you, Karen, with your fantastic background on the call, just to talk about the benefits of that approach for Akzonobel and the changes that you've noticed by working in such an integrated way in your comm strategy.
Thanks, Kate, and good morning, everyone on the call. Yeah, I guess it was, only really 18 months ago or so that we really brought together our social PR, so our owned and earned comms, and in the way that we are working today, and have worked through with you guys in the last year and a half or so. And the benefits have really just been much better integration of the planning process, the execution all the way through the line. Much better integration across audiences, because we're working with a brand, Dulux, that is a leader in the retail DIY space, but it's also, as Dulux Trade, a leader in the trade B2B space. So it's also allowed us to, I guess, remove the barriers, the silos, even internally across how we go to market with those brands, and have a really tight, consolidated plan that is a message that can be more agile and get out to the market in a better, more coherent way. So I think that integration, simplicity, and speed have been the biggest benefits.
Brilliant, thanks, Karen. And actually, thinking back on the size of Akzonobel, there's lots of organisations on the call today, some big, some small. And there's been quite a lot sent in to me about the challenges that they face working on sometimes restricted budgets and how they make sure that they don't spread themselves too thinly. So Rebecca, it'd be really good if you can just outline budget and how we make it work with whatever we've got.
Yeah, we always make it work somehow. Now, in all seriousness, I think integration is really key to making budgets work. I think because we work in these integrated sessions, because we plan together, it means that we stretch assets, we integrate planning time, we integrate ideas. So everything almost sort of doubles in value, and we can find ways to have loads of efficiencies. I think we've all been in that sort of situation where, you know, you've got PR sitting with one agency, social sitting in another, influencers in another, paid in another, and you end up sort of paying for double work. And it's really hard to avoid that when things aren't integrated. And so I think, you know, for us, like, vertical planning is one of the best ways for us to make sure that budgets go as far as possible. And I think also being not brutal, but like really honest about what the right channels are once you get into that story that you want to tell and who you're trying to talk to. I think there's sort of a perception that you need to be everywhere, and you know, you're much better off being really effective and impactful in a channel or in two channels than trying to spread yourself really thinly and broadly over so many of them. And I guess the last thing on budget that I would say is there's also been this sort of shift, I think, this is maybe more on a social perspective, but it's true for media too, to sort of lo-fi content. So moving away from this like super polished, extremely sort of expensive to produce content to stuff that feels more organic and feels more sort of user generated. There are studies that show it performing better in paid. It certainly performs better in organic. And those assets also perform better in media because they feel authentic. They don't feel like brand ads. So that's a really important place where actually budgets can start to you know, save quite a significant amount.
And what's coming across kind of through this conversation is how we structure and organise ourselves. And I think that's kind of the operational side of that is really, really key to success. And I know a lot of people on the call have also asked about structure, but also how they engage with internal stakeholders and bring them on the journey to kind of reorganising themselves in this way. So I just wanted to ask you, Karen, about, we've worked with you as a business for 2 years, but just to outline how your marketing team has restructured in the last couple of years, particularly to help accommodate kind of this new way of working in integrated fashion.
Yeah, I guess we used to have a kind of separate retail and trade comms team, and within that the teams were looking almost at campaigns. They were either working on certain brands or they were working on campaigns, I guess what was resulting from that was just lots of duplication effort or wasted efforts. I guess, Rebecca, you've just touched there on the fact of, you know, creating assets twice, or having, you know, our trade and our retail teams planning something separately. So we'd end up having, I don't know, perhaps an influencer day for trade on one day and the following day having it for retail, and just not kind of working as not having the kind of joint ownership in one place from the start. So when we changed to work in this kind of paid, earned, owned team framework, and across the channels and the brands, it allowed the team really to have much better clarity right from the outset of what the brief was, to have a more integrated brief from the outset, be really clear on what the needs were. And for the rest of the business, they had single points of contact. So whether that was working with our legal team or our customer service team and customer helplines or sales, there was, in terms of customer briefs, there was one point to call and one kind of just, I guess, streamlined ways of working and clear roles and responsibilities within the comms teams with one point to call that had oversight of exactly how the plan was running. So it just meant better speed, less wastage, and better ownership for the individuals running the campaigns as well, or running the activities.
And you mentioned just then, Karen, about legal and customer services. How have you sort of more broadly across the business engaged those internal audiences in your objectives and brought them on the journey? Because I know that's a question that quite a few people here have asked.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have, when we first moved to kind of changing our ways of working, there was definitely quite a shift needed from everyone. And that really started with quite detailed workshops just around ways of working, having clear races and making sure everyone knew who was responsible for what, who was responding, what kind of, let's say, the internal SLAs were in terms of response times, etc. Because we know in areas like this, speed is of the essence. So I think putting in that upfront planning time together and hearing from those other teams what they needed from us was really helpful as well, to kind of have that, let's say, it's not a big manual by any stretch, but having those guardrails and that those rules of engagement, let's say, between the teams and real clarity has really helped in, I guess, the business being on board with how we're running now.
And I think the place you've got to it is, it's a best-in-class structure for this kind of work. And Rebecca, it'd be good if you could just outline how we work at Cirkle, how we reflect those client structures to get the fastest, best work out the door on their behalf.
Of course. I mean, we obviously, we still have all the specialists within our team. So, the content creators, the influencer specialists and managers, the publicists, etc. But we structure a team, so we have these core teams across channels. So it's, the sort of teams who are leading on the day-to-day sort of account management and client engagement, and then all of these specialists who are helping to support to make sure the stories are as impactful as possible that we're telling. But I guess in a similar way to what Karen was mentioning, we've also tried to have really clear roles and responsibilities, and that includes a sort of story leads. So on each account we have a PR, publicity and social story lead, so they're sort of funneling all of the information, all of the things that are trending, that are coming up in conversation, that are happening in media. They're funneling it in their areas of specialty, in their areas of awareness, to build a layered story. So, if we see something on social, if a celebrity, for example, has tagged a brand, our teams are never going to just share that story. They're going to pick up with their other story leads, with PR, with publicity, and say, what else can we be doing with this? And I think, that question of what else can we do with this and how can we make it mean more is something that we ask on a daily basis for all of our clients. And I guess it's sort of that structure of those story leads that is really important for us and helps make sure that we aren't overwhelming clients with loads of stories all the time, and actually we're giving them this really thought out strategic approach to the stories that we think are going to help them get to where they want to get to. And we also do integrated planning sessions, like I mentioned, and it sounds really simple, but it's so important to do those. I cannot stress enough how much doing integrated planning has changed sort of the way we're able to deliver more meaningful work for clients as well.
And just before we get into the case study specifically, just touching on the agility point, Rebecca, really quickly, could you just outline how we make this happen quickly? Because sometimes on a reactive basis, we have very little time.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is being accountable, like setting an ambition. If you have an ambition that you want your same day creative turnaround on reactive, like holding, your agency, but also the client team accountable and saying you need to commit to doing this if this is what you want. But I think in general, like really clear guidelines on the brand, on social, on legal, on promotions and T's and C's. I feel like T's and C's often catch people out on reactive stuff, like making sure all of that ahead and understand sort of what is and isn't off limits, how brave your client, or how brave you want to be. And I guess having a really simplified approval process is important. I think more than 2 or 3 people needing to approve something often either really dilutes the idea, or it just slows it down so much that it loses the momentum to travel. So those would be sort of the 2 biggest things.
I was going to add actually to that, Rebecca, just another benefit I think is when it comes to the reactive, because obviously this is a space where you need to be ready, agile, reactive, and being able to kind of move through those really quickly. Responses, or if something isn't going to plan, how do you contain it quickly? I think having the more integrated approach really helps that, because obviously there's so much overlap.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
And Karen touched on it earlier about kind of that preparedness point as well, and engaging the right stakeholders ahead of time, so everybody's very clear on the guardrails and what is and isn't possible. So when you need to move quickly, we don't need to seek permission because it's already been granted.
Yeah.
And so moving on to kind of the star of the show, I guess, which is Colour of the Year. So this is a fantastic initiative run globally by Akzonobel, and last year it was in its 20th year. So I wanted to hand over to Karen, really. This is her baby, to outline the purpose of Colour of the Year and the brief last year specifically.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. So Colour of the Year, or Colour Futures as it's called as a programme, is something that has been running for 20 years. It is something where we bring together, I guess, industry and design leads across all over the world. So it's a global activity. They come together with our aesthetics team in our head office in Amsterdam. So if you can imagine, there might be architects, designers, product designers, fashion designers, thought leaders in different spaces, as well as actually economists, and come together to look as a panel of experts at what are the trends happening around the world, what is the human truth that is common across the world that is going to inspire and lead the colours coming into our homes, our offices, our hotels, etc., in the years ahead. And every year that kind of coming together of industry experts globally happens, and through those couple of days workshops, they come up with in essence a hero color that represents the story of the trends happening around the world. And then from that, each market, so for us obviously here in the UK, and also in Ireland, we look at that story and have to think, okay, well, how do we get that story out to the market that really in a way that demonstrates our colour authority, our brand leadership, our connectedness with industry leaders and thought leaders in the space, and ultimately we are taking this story and this future forecasting of colours not just into kind of retailers for DIY consumers to buy this colour, but also to designers, architects who are designing the buildings of tomorrow, who are perhaps doing the next restaurant, hotel, leisure space, whatever that is, and they are also wanting to make sure they're giving their clients the latest thinking and colours. But so this year our colour is Wild Wonder, and you can see it here behind me on the wall, and that is the hero, as I say. This particular colour, every colour is a story. This particular colour is all around nature, but it demonstrates the renewed focus globally on things like mental health, or the bio inspiration that is coming through into everything that we're living and doing. Thinking about the cycles of life, of renewal coming out of a pandemic, and all the change that we've globally been through. And really that kind of harmony with nature and desire to learn from nature, I guess. And that is part of the Wild Wonder story. But this year, what we needed to do was not only share the Wild Wonder story, but also demonstrate this thought leadership, brand leadership around the 20 years of expertise that we have in doing this. So that kind of put an extra layer on the brief for this year of what we wanted to do.
Amazing. I'm sorry. Go on,
sorry,
Kate.
Becca. No, sorry, Becca. I was going to hand over to you to kind of talk through how we took that story and made it work across channel, and also what the results were, which we've got on the screen.
Yeah, if you could click forward, I think it'd be 2 slides, and then one more. So yeah, just sort of recapping on the brief. So it was all about launching the 20th anniversary and aiming for an increase in cut through year on year. We had a reduced budget in place to do it, and this sort of beautiful set of global assets. But obviously, we needed to figure out how do we localize that story, and that really was our approach. So again, it was driving that reach with relevance. How do we take a global story and localize it to ensure that it had resonance across the wide breadth of audiences that Karen mentioned, and felt authentic and engaging across all those different audiences. So if you click on, I guess one thing that's important to mention is that sort of in addition to integrating PR and social within the agency, we also integrate our trade and consumer responses, which Karen mentioned they are doing internally at Akzo as well. But I think by integrating those responses, we get additional efficiencies, but we also get a lot of consistency in messaging and the sort of 360-degree approach to the story that we're telling. So in this case, to help media and trade and consumers feel a bit closer to the global story, we worked with Dulux's creative director in the UK, Marianne, to bring the colour to life for journalists across the sectors, and to also sort of illuminate the story, but what it meant for those specific audiences. And we were quite targeted. And once we figured out how we were going to localize that story, it was then all about targeted by channel, targeted by content consumption and mindset. How do we appear in the right places to ensure sort of something is going to travel as far as possible? So in addition to the broader press outreach, we also did things like one-to-ones with journalists. So we had Marianne sit down with quite a lot of journalists. Luckily, she very generously gave us her time. But that sort of allowed for a lot of bespoke points of relevance. It allowed every journalist to have their own experience with the color, to understand what it meant, where it came from, and what it was going to mean to the people who were consuming their content. We created 230 pieces in 6 months of content for social, utilizing the sort of 25 global assets, but also creating our own, using influencers, using UGC, making sure that the assets that we created would travel, I guess, more effectively on social than some of the globalized assets, and live more natively on the platform. We also held an event with trade media and customers, and had some trade influencers down as well under NDA before the color was launched, so that they could see the color first. We could capture their reactions, create content around it. And I think, because especially with the trade audience, I think the people who are best placed to tell your story aren't necessarily from the business. Painters and decorators in particular, like they care a lot about word of mouth. So, getting our painter and decorator influencers to talk about the color and the story was going to be a lot more powerful for them and travel a lot further. So we did all these different sort of integrated approaches to make sure that the story was going to reach as far as it possibly could. If you click on to the next slide, I think we've just got some overviews of coverage. Exciting for us, possibly not that meaningful to other people, but we got some really amazing features and long leads. If you keep on clicking through, I think there's another slide on sort of the consumer coverage that we got, and then after that, a slide on the trade coverage. Even the social content, which I think is on the next slide. You'll see the consumer and the retail social content, like everything. We took approximately 25 pieces and transformed them, but everything looks like it's come from the same story. Everything looks cohesive, related. There's clear messaging, and you see that through everything that we created, from the press materials through to the content, through to the events. It was all really cohesive, and that's sort of the activity. Don't know if we want to jump into results as well. If you click on one more, there you go. Yeah, so I mean, luckily it worked really well, which is why we're here. But there's obviously a strong global story means a really powerful starting point. But localizing it for us was a lot more than sort of UK faces and spaces. It was about sort of how we reflected back to local media and understanding local content expectations and brand perceptions. And we got some really great results. And on the trade side, we got 45 pieces of coverage with 12 million opportunities to see, 160,000 organic reach on the trade channels, which are, relatively niche communities with a 5% engagement rate. But the year-on-year numbers that we have on the consumer side are also really exciting. So, we got 98 pieces against a KPI of, I think, 75 from the year before. Got 1.5 million organic reach. But our engagement on that content, it wasn't just the reach. Like, we got a 3.5 almost % engagement rate compared to less than 0.5% the year before. And what that tells us is that the story we told really meant something to people, and it meant enough for them to share it, to like it, to endorse it across their channels, which is really exciting. And you see that come through in the engagement numbers. Almost 50,000 engagement on socials in 2023 compared to the year before, which had about 6,000. So again, like, that sort of localizing and that story first breakdown of exactly how we wanted to tell that story and where produced really strong results.
It's interesting as well, Rebecca, arguably internally, this color of Wild Wonder was perhaps not as commercial, like we didn't expect the same commercial results as some of the previous years, but certainly in 2022, the color, when everybody thought this is a color everybody will want in their homes, where Wild Wonder, people just bought the story. It was just like, even if you didn't have, paint your whole house in this color, the story and the palette drew them in to what it meant. And that was really interesting, because in some ways this was almost a harder job on the color itself, but the story was so compelling and rooted in such deep insight that it really traveled. I think that really reflects in the results as well.
And Karen, just thinking about kind of more broadly about internal comms as well, a few people have asked this question: how do you bring to life a story and kind of run it through at every touch point? So just wondered if you could outline how you brought this campaign to life through the business in the UK as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say we always take internal engagement really seriously. It's something that never has any budget against it. It's something that certainly we kind of all roll our sleeves up, and it's the team getting creative as well and thinking, okay, how can we really excite our colleagues and feel colleagues about this? So we always have plan a launch event, so physically get people together, bring in props. Some of it, we talk about UGC, some of it is stuff that the team have done themselves. Bring in, set the scene, treat the internal engagement piece just as you would a customer sell-in presentation or engagement day, but really try to spend the time bringing to life the insight, the story, the emotions, the feelings, and really help people to understand what it is that we're doing. So we always get people in a room. So we did a big town hall. We also recorded Marianne, our creative director, talking to colleagues. It wasn't just the launch video, just a simple kind of, why this is different than previous years, what the hook on, how we're taking it to market. I think that tailoring basically the messages to the internal audience is really compelling, but physically getting people together, getting them hands-on. I think that the reveal of the color at the original, at the very first step, I think Marianne brought in a painted vase into the boardroom and kind of took it out of a Hessian bag with seeds from spices and seeds falling out on the table. It is getting creative yourself, but actually immersing your colleagues and taking the time to treat them like any other audience, even if you don't have a budget to do that. And colleagues love it. They feel more confident, then they are then more likely to share the content when they start seeing it as well on their own personal channels, but obviously feel much more confident and embrace it in a way that they wouldn't they wouldn't necessarily embrace an email and a video coming through in their inbox.
Thanks so much, Karen. I'm conscious that it's 11:30. I said it was going to be short and sweet, and it really is. We could wax lyrical about this for a very long time, but thank you very much to everyone who's joined us. Please do get in touch afterwards if you'd like to discuss any of today's content further. If you think that Rebecca and I can help you in terms of how you might structure yourselves or start adopting the story first approach, we'd love to have a conversation with you. And I'm sure Karen would be really open to linking in with anyone on the call who might be interested in catching up with her separately as well. But thank you very much for your time. And there will be a recording of this available on our website as well.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Karen.